Getting robbed of self-worth medals in narcissistic abuse. Does it feel very difficult or even impossible to feel proud of yourself? Does winning feel like a foreign experience to you? Do you find yourself taking on activities in order to disprove that you're incapable rather than seeking feelings of effectiveness, power, or satisfaction? And do you spend a lot of time trying not to be a disappointment to yourself? Well, if you survived narcissistic abuse by a parent or a partner and endured the role of scapegoat, then these questions could very well fit with your experience. For the child or partner to a narcissistic abuser, there's just not room in the relationship for that child or partner's strengths, their appropriate needs for affirmation and validation, nor room for the rightful pride in who they are and what they can do. In today's video, I want to explain how the scapegoat survivor of narcissistic abuse is systematically denied the self-worth medals that they deserve. Next, I'll describe how the scapegoat child or partner may learn to cope with the narcissistic abuser's withholding of needed recognition for their positive qualities. And if you watch until the end, you'll learn 3 tactics to help you reclaim the pride in yourself and your abilities that you're entitled to and that is frankly long overdue. Well, my name is Jayreid, and I'm a licensed psychotherapist in San Francisco, California. I specialize in helping individuals recover from narcissistic abuse in individual therapy and in my online course and accompanying Facebook community. We take a 3-pronged approach to recovery that involves making sense of what happened, gaining emotional, psychological, and sometimes physical distance from the narcissistic abuser, and living in defiance of the narcissist's rules. Today's video falls under the category of making sense of what happened for the scapegoat survivor of narcissistic abuse. And if you survived narcissistic abuse from a parent or a partner, you might also check out my free ebook on this topic. It explains why someone is selected to be the scapegoat. And it's not because they're so bad, but generally because they're so good. And then why none of this sort of treatment was ever deserved. The ebook makes clear how the process of narcissistic abuse and the role of the scapegoat is really a product of the narcissistic person's psychopathology and nothing else. You can find the link in the description below or by clicking here. Well, here it is, February 2022, and the Winter Olympics are on right now in Beijing, China, where there's world-class athletes competing to win medals. Now, let's take snowboarding, for example. Shaun White is the American athlete who's dominated this event for more than a decade. And let's just say he has a phenomenal run and then is waiting for the judges to give him a score for that run. These moments always kind of result in bated breath by the crowd. And I think part of that sort of bated breath moment is our slight anxiety that Shaun White isn't going to be justly awarded for his performance, along with the hope that he will. So there's a tension there. And we all then have a sigh of relief when the judge's score matches our sense of the quality of Shaun White's performance. If the score is lower or higher than the collective sense of his performance, then there's often an outcry and a sense that things are not right. Well, what do the Winter Olympics have to do with being the scapegoat survivor of narcissistic abuse? Well, I think a lot. So if you were cast into the role of scapegoat by a narcissistic abuser, you can perform like Shaun White in any given domain, and the judge's score from the narcissistic abuser is always going to be way lower than you deserve. If you were a child born to a narcissistic parent, then maybe you're used to being judged as a poor performer by that parent, maybe despite objectively performing quite well. And you may also have learned not to get your hopes up that others' evaluations of you will match the quality of your performance. Now, this can be demoralizing to say the least. It can also turn life into a grim affair because there's really no viable path towards victory and the resulting pride in oneself that happens when we're victorious. That's not a great basis for motivation. It's no wonder why those who've survived scapegoat and narcissistic abuse can often have trouble motivating themselves to work towards personal and professional goals. They're often stuck working towards goals without the sort of payoffs that are so incentivizing of pride, joy, and a sense of the thrill of victory or accomplishment. So why is life rigged for the scapegoat survivor to deny that person the just deserts of their efforts? I think this metaphor of corrupt judges at the Olympics is a good one for what it's like to grow up as the scapegoat to a narcissistic parent. In these cases, the narcissistic parent's own core sense of worthlessness, denial of those feelings, and then insistence that they're instead superior to other people, and then resulting mission to find their cast off worthlessness in someone else, just makes it so that they cannot tolerate to give a good score to the person they've relocated their own worthlessness into. And it's the scapegoated child where that worthlessness is typically relocated into. And unfortunately for that scapegoated child, he or she also has no way to doubt the narcissistic parent's judgments of him or her. That child is born into the world without a frame of reference for who he or she is, and really depends on their parents for their very first and often most influential answer to who they are. And if that parent is narcissistically abusive, then the answer that child receives, particularly if that child's natural abilities or qualities threaten the narcissistic parent's fragile sense of superiority, that answer will likely be a disappointing or even humiliating one for the child. I think it's really important here to distinguish the messages the scapegoated child of a narcissistic parent receives from the actual qualities of that child. Just like Shaun White in the example I mentioned earlier, the child could be superlative in what they do or who they are, and it is this very capability that can evoke the low score from the narcissistic parent. It's not that the child did not deserve an accurate and therefore high score, but that the evaluation was in essence rigged. Well, here's an anonymized example of a scapegoat survivor who was working on distinguishing who she actually was from the low scores she received throughout her childhood and adolescence as a scapegoat to a narcissistically abusive mother and enabling father. Let's just call her Vanessa. As an adult, Vanessa was trying to make sense of what she endured at the hands of her parents, and she went to therapy to help her sort it out. Well, through the course of therapy, she had grown to recognize some of her, very real qualities as a person. She was perceptive, she had a keen sense of fairness, she was motivated to fight injustices that she encountered, and she cared deeply about the feelings of other people. She was also the only one in her family who ever seemed to voice that something felt wrong. Well, at one point, as she was in their therapy, she was speaking one-on-one with her father, who had always taken a submissive role to Vanessa's narcissistically abusive mother and had refused to ever intervene on Vanessa's behalf. And during this conversation, she asked her father, did you recognize that I was the psychologically and emotionally strongest member of our family? And her father immediately cut from his usual sort of passive, agreeable stance and said gruffly and sharply, I don't know, Vanessa, I didn't go around handing out medals. Well, as we spoke about this moment in therapy, Vanessa immediately felt shame at having supposedly bragged by citing her strength and asking for her father to recognize that. Well, her therapist quickly responded with, why didn't he hand out medals? Wasn't that his job as a father? This statement got Vanessa's shame to lift, and she could come back to her initial, very rightful question of why her father did not give her the medal she deserved for being so strong. And that in essence, she was robbed like Shaun White might be if he got like a score of 3 out of 10 after doing an incredible snowboard run. I think Vanessa's example and others like it illustrate how matter-of-factly the scapegoat of the narcissistic family is denied the recognition and pride they deserve in who they are and what they can do. Vanessa learned to cope with this ongoing denial of the needed self-worth medals she deserved by not asking for such recognition. So when she was growing up, she didn't have a therapist who could help her, work through the humiliating way her family received her very appropriate efforts to be appreciated and recognized for her strengths and capacities. And as a kid, she also had no way to know that she was up against a psychological pathology in her mother and her father that made it impossible for her to get the credit from them she so needed at the time. The experience Vanessa had over and over again was that when she piped up to ask for someone to witness her gifts or abilities, she experienced shame instead of pride. So why shame? Well, as you may recall, if you saw my 3-part series on recovering from shame after narcissistic abuse, And if you haven't, the link is in the description box below, or you can click here. Shame results when someone in a relationship with someone else goes to that person with the intent of sharing something meaningful and vulnerable to that person. Like when Vanessa asked her father if he recognized how strong she was. And then that person expects the other person to respond in a validating and supportive way. For that person to communicate that he or she shares the state of mind that the person is experiencing. And this would have happened if Vanessa's father said something like, "Boy, did I saw from the moment you were a kid. You always had a great bullshit detector and were never afraid to speak up about it." But instead, when this expectation gets violated and the other person responds unexpectedly and derisively, then the intense burning feeling of shame can be experienced. So when Vanessa's father responded with his comment, he was in essence telling her, "You see yourself as deserving encouragement for being so strong, but I see you as weak for needing such recognition in the first place, and I want you to feel embarrassed about that need." So in the first example, you might think of the person having an expectation they'll be met with affirmation and support, and the other person does that, right? And so there's sort of a bridge that stays intact. But in Vanessa's example, what happened was she came along hoping to be, in essence, mirrored, that she was the strongest member of the family. But instead, Vanessa's father comes at her kind of from here. So here she comes hoping that she'll be met with some affirmation and validation for the strength she possessed and showed as a person when she was a kid. And her father instead has a radically different understanding of her that is not positive. He's saying, "I regard you as being weak and defective for wanting to be validated that you are strong." And it's in the distance between here and here that often results in experience of shame, sort of in that gap, by the person in Vanessa's role. Okay, now that I've explained how the scapegoat survivor of narcissistic abuse is so often robbed of the self-worth medals they deserve, let's talk about 3 tactics to help the survivor reclaim the pride in themselves and their abilities that, again, is long overdue. In essence, to begin winning the medals they deserved all along. Well, the first tactic is to keep on keeping on. If you've been denied the medals of self-worth you deserve in the manner I've described today, then continuing to sort of compete in life can often feel like a slog. I mean, the feeling can be, why should I go do the thing I enjoy when I'm not going to experience any sense of accomplishment or pride in what I can do? And I think this is a super understandable reaction and reflects the unfair position the scapegoat was put in by the narcissistic abuser. Well, I think the only way to recover through this feature of the abuse and the demoralization that can happen is to continue trying at the things that are important to you. But in the effort of continuing to try, you might also offer yourself patience and compassion for when that effort of trying feels like a slog or feels bleak or even feels overwhelming. And then after the compassion and the patience has been applied to yourself, when you feel a little bit more ready, working to resume your efforts towards those goals. And the second tactic is knowing you deserve the medals you were robbed of. So finding safe friends, partners, and perhaps having a therapist can be so important in this process of recovery. Because in these kinds of safe relationships, you're unlikely to find the kinds of shaming responses to your rightful expressions of pride in who you are and what you can do. And they can allow you to see how those earlier shaming responses you received for asking for your deserved medals were wrong in nature. I'd encourage you to check out Module 4 in my online course that's titled Identifying Safe People as Friends and Partners for a more detailed explanation of how to find and cultivate relationships with these types of individuals. You can find the link to the course below or by clicking here. And the third tactic is to practice giving yourself medals. And here's an exercise to do that. At the end of each day, you can write down 3 things that you, at least hypothetically, can say you deserve credit for. And you may come up with a ton of reasons why you don't feel that credit, and that's okay. That with time and practice, it's remarkable how this habit can get under one's skin in a very good way. Well, I hope you found today's video useful, and thank you for watching and your continued engagement with this channel. I look forward to posting again next Sunday. Take care.